I'm very pleased to welcome Sonya Lifschitz this afternoon. She's a Ukrainian-born pianist who is based in Australia but performs all over the world, has had music written for her, plays music of many times and places, and is a very highly esteemed international pianist. We've actually had her here before, performing in a duo with Lisa Moore. Today's performance, as in the email, the program note you would have seen in the email that I sent out, is going to be an audio-visual feast, as it says in the program note, and I think you'll find it extremely engaging and thought-provoking. It's quite a virtuosic interaction between the performer, the music and the visuals. And this piece was written by Robert Davidson, a Queensland composer, in conjunction with Sonya herself. So without further ado, I'm very pleased to welcome Sonya and give her a big hand, everyone. Thank you.
Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for being here. Welcome. It's great to be back here again. As Claire said, I was here last year with a very dear colleague and friend, the wonderful pianist Lisa Moore. Today is a very different program. I think Claire's already mentioned. It's called Stalin's Piano, and it's written by a very dear colleague and friend, composer Robert Davidson, who is in Brisbane. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the work before I play it for you. Artists and politicians tend to often overlap. Artists may concern themselves with deciding how the society works, or imagining new ways for public life, or dealing with issues of social concern. Sometimes they stage protests, as for example, Billie Holiday in her song Strange Fruit. Politicians, on the other hand, are often seen rehearsing their parliamentary performances and seeing themselves as architects of public life. And then, of course, there are some who straddle both of these arenas. I'm thinking, for example, of the wonderful pianist-composer Ignaz Paderewski, who later became the Prime Minister of Poland, or the Hollywood actor who later became President Reagan, or one of our own Australian rock stars, Minister Peter Garrett, or the wonderful Arabian poet, musician, and senator fighting for women's rights in the Middle East, Maluma. Hitler is often seen as his frustration of not becoming the opera designer and the artist that he passionately wanted to become was the turning point in his life towards politics. This piece, Stalin's Piano, is essentially a walk through a portrait gallery. Except it's not portraits of faces, but it's portraits of voices. And so as you walk through this gallery, you make your own meanings, you find your own parallels, you create your own connections. The way it works, that some of the speeches that you will hear are mimicked by the piano almost to the syllable. And other speeches are framed by the piano to intensify the psychological and the emotional underpinning of the speeches. At the heart of this work is a story about an extraordinary Russian Soviet pianist, Maria Yudina, who was a huge role model and hero for me growing up as a young piano student in Soviet Russia. She's a woman who defied and resisted Stalin's tyranny and dictatorship and lived to tell her story. So hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you in about an hour on the other end.
Mr. Bragg, is it true that you have written a number of very revolutionary poems, plays, and other writings?
I have written a number of poems and songs and plays in the fight against Hitler, and of course they can be considered therefore as revolutionary, because I, of course, was for the overthrow of that government.
But Mr. We're not interested in any works that he might have written calling for the overthrow of Germany or the government there.
Well, from an examination of the works which Mr. Breck has written, particularly in collaboration with Mr. Hans Eisler, he seems to be a person of international importance to the communist revolutionary movement. I would like to ask Mr. Breck whether or not he wrote a poem, a song rather, entitled Forward, We've Not Forgotten.
Forward, we've what?
Forward, we've not forgotten. Forward, we've not forgotten. Our union in hunger and pain, no matter what may threaten, forward, not forgotten. We have a world to gain. We shall free the world of shadow, every shop and every room, every road and every meadow. All the world will be our own. Did you write that, Mr. Breck?
No, I wrote a German poem, but that is very different, you see, from this thing.
Are you now, have you ever been a member of the Communist Party of any country?
Mr. Chairman, I have heard my colleagues and they consider this question not as proper, but I am a guest in this country and do not want to enter in any legal arguments, so I will answer your question fully as well I can. I was not a member, or am not a member of any communist party.
Your answer is then that you have never been a member of the Communist Party.
That is correct.
I would like specifically to know what you need. I would like specifically to know what you need. How would you like to change the way that we live?
I would like to make it appropriate to the Declaration of Independence, to the center line of our freedom. I'd like to have a free architecture. I'd like to have architecture that belonged where you see it standing and was a grace to the landscape instead of a disgrace. And the letters we received from our clients tell us how those buildings we built for them have changed the character of their whole life and their whole existence. It is different now than it was before. Well, I'd like to do that for the country.
When you come to New York, as you did today, and you see, did you come by air?
Yeah, I came by air.
And you see the skyline of New York, this does not excite you, this does not exalt you in any manner.
Quite so.
It does not.
It does not. Because it never was planned. It's all a race for rent. And it is a great monument, I think, to the power of money and greed. Trying to substitute money for ideas. I don't see an idea in the whole thing anywhere, do you? Where's the idea in it? What's the idea?
The idea is obviously, it would seem to me, that a lot of people want to live together, as you point out, to make their livings, to make money, to enjoy what this large city has to offer. And I guess from time immemorial, people have flocked, more or less, to one spot to exchange ideas as well as goods.
But, my dear Mark, there was a justification for that. When there was no other means of communication than by personal contact. That's when the plan for this city you're living in now originated. It originated back there in the Middle Ages, when the only way you could have culture, the only way you could get social distinction or any education from it was by ganging up I would like to make it appropriate. I would like to make it appropriate. I would like to make it appropriate for the Declaration of Independence to the center line of our freedom. I'd like to have a free architecture. I would like to make it appropriate for the Declaration of Independence to the center line of our freedom. I'd like to have a free architecture. I'd like to have architecture that belongs where you see it standing and was a grace to the landscape instead of a disgrace. I would like to make it appropriate for the Declaration of Independence to the center line of our freedom. I'd like to have a free architecture. I'd like to have architecture that belongs where you see it standing and was a grace to the landscape instead of a disgrace. I'd like to have a free architecture. 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 I'd like to have a free architecture.
I'll say this. I want to keep my own people very alert. Yeah. 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 No, hang on tight. Yes, sir. Thanks a lot, General. All right, thanks.
Sweet spring is your time, is my time, is our time. For springtime is love time, and viva sweet love. All the merry little birds are flying in the floating in the very spirit, singing in the winging in the blossoming. Lovers go and lovers come, a-wandering, but any two are perfectly alone. There's nobody else alive. Such a sky and such a sun I never knew, and neither did you. And everybody never breathed quite so many kinds of yes. Not a tree can count his leaves, each herself my opening, but shining who by thousands mean only one amazing thing. Secretly adoring, shyly, tiny winging, darting, floating, merry in the blossoming, always joyful selves are singing. Sweet spring is your time, is my time, is our time. For springtime is love time, and viva sweet love.
Leopold Stokowski and his symphony orchestra gave us Percy Granger's Early One Morning, and now back to Percy Granger himself, our guest today on Favorites of the Famous. Mr. Granger, you've been called the one cheerful, sunny composer living. To what would you attribute the warmth and the naturalness of your music?
Well, I don't know that my music is consistently warm and natural, but I think the impression that it's cheerful?
Mm-hmm.
It comes from people not knowing the words of my compositions, but I think I'm very morose. Musically.
You suppose they're misinterpreting you, like you said before?
Well, they know one piece out of 20, and that one piece happens to be lively, and they like that, and they ignore the other 19, as I generally do with most music.
Well, you don't actually feel morose.
Yes, I do.
You do?
I enjoy it very much.
You enjoy feeling sad? Well, I think that's wonderful. I mean, if you enjoy being sad, you should be on.
Well, it isn't a question of whether I enjoy too much only, but I think music is the art of agony. 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 Music is after all derived from screaming. It's not derived from laughing.
Derived from screaming, that I...
Well, when you think most music originated in trying to placate hostile theaters.
Well, certainly.
Like the Chinese banging a gong in a storm, and screaming with fear, and screaming in supplication are not so very far removed, and music is, of course, the child of all that. Music is, after all, derived from screaming. Music is, after all, derived from screaming. It's not derived from laughing. Music is, after all, derived from screaming. It's not derived from laughing. Music is, after all, derived from screaming. Music is the art of agony. Music is the art of agony. Music is after all derived from screaming. It's not derived from laughing. Music is after all derived from worse from screaming. I think the best thing for a composer is to be badly treated in every way.
A composer to be badly treated in every way was Dmitri Shostakovich. During Stalin's purges, when disobedience often meant death or the Gulag, government decree dictated what was good art, acceptable art. Stalin attended Shostakovich's opera Lady Macbeth of Demzheng's district on 26 January 1936 in Moscow. The next day, the state newspaper Pravda's editorial condemned Shostakovich's music as anti-Soviet ugliness. The ability of good music to enthrall the masses, it read, has been sacrificed on the altar of petty bourgeois formalism. This is playing at abstruseness, and such games can only finish badly. Shostakovich feared for his life. His opera was immediately withdrawn, and he never composed another. One of Shostakovich's staunchest defenders was his friend, the pianist Maria Yudina. Many of her closest friends lost to the Gulag labor camps or worse. Yudina was defiant to the core, wearing her cross very visibly, championing the most adventurous blacklisted works, and reading banned poets like Boris Pasternak and Nikolai Zabolotsky in her concerts. But she was Stalin's favorite pianist. In his final days, Stalin didn't let anyone to see him for days at a time. He listened to the radio a lot. Once he called the radio committee, asking if they had a record of Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 23, heard on the radio the night before, played by Yudina. He added, "Of course," they told him. Actually, there was no record. The concert had been live, but they were too afraid to say no to Stalin.
После взятия власти нашей партии в 1917 году и после того, как партия предприняла реальные меры по ликвидации капиталистического помещичьего гнета, представители братских партий, восхищаясь отвагой и успехами нашей партии, присвоили ей звание ударной бригады мирового революционного и рабочего движения.
Stalin demanded that they send the record to his dacha. The committee panicked, but they had to do something. They called in Yudina and an orchestra and recorded that night. Everyone was shaking with fright, except for Yudina, naturally. Yudina later told me that they had to send the conductor home. He was so scared he couldn't think. They called in another conductor who trembled and got everything mixed up, confusing the orchestra. Only the third conductor was in any shape to finish this recording. Anyway, the record was ready by morning. They made one single copy, this one, and sent it to Stalin. They say that this performance of Mozart was on the record player when the great leader was found dead in his dacha. This was the last thing he had listened to.
Избушка на курьих ножках, Баба-Яга. Всегда и во всех сказках Баба-Яга появляется как носительница зла. И если не всегда преследуемые ею люди или добрые духи погибают, то есть если им удается выйти из ее ужасающих цепких преследований, так или иначе Баба-Яга неуклонно все путает, всему мешает, всему вредит, и не приведи Господь повстречаться с ней. Избушка на курьих ножках, Баба-Яга. Всегда и во всех сказках Баба-Яга появляется как носительница зла. И если не всегда преследуемые ею люди или добрые духи погибают, то есть если им удается выйти из ее ужасающих цепких преследований, так или иначе Баба-Яга неуклонно все путает, всему мешает, всему вредит, и не приведи Господь повстречаться с ней. Баба-Яга.
Благодарю вас, Иосиф Виссарионович, за вашу поддержку. Я буду молиться за вас день и ночь и просить Господа простить ваши огромные грехи перед народом и страной. Господь милостив, Он простит вас. Деньги я дала в церковь, прихожанкой которой являюсь.
smelling the sweet grass of distant hills. Too steep to climb, too far to see in this handful of water scooped from the river dam. Touching the sky, where like a single wing my hand dips through clouds, tasting the shadow of basket willows, the colour of ferns. A perch, spoon-coloured, climbs where the moon sank, trailing bubbles of white, and school kids on picnics swing from a rope, head over sunlit hills like angels. They plunge into the sun at midday, into silence of pine woods hanging over a sunken hill farm. Taking all this in at the lips, holding it in the cup of my hand, and further down the hiss of volcanoes, rockfall, and hot metals cooling in blue-black depths 100 centuries back. Taking all this in as the water takes it. Sky, sunlight, sweet grass flavors, and the long-held breath of children. A landscape mirrored, held a moment, and let go again.
Die Masse ist an sich Rohstoff. Sie zu gestalten und aus ihr jene Kräfte herauszuholen, die Systeme stürzen und neue Welten aufbauen, wird die erste und vornehmste Aufgabe jeder Staatsmenschen begabung sein. Auch der wahre Politiker ist im letzten Sinne des Wortes ein Künstler. Auch der wahre Politiker ist im letzten Sinne des Wortes ein Künstler. So wie der Bildhauer den rohen Marmor abzirkelt, behaut und meißelt, so formt der Staatsmann aus dem rohen Stoff Masse ein Volk, gibt ihm ein inneres Geripp und ein haltendes Gefüge und bläst ihm dann jenen schöpferischen Odem ein, der das Volk zur Kulturnation emporwachsen lässt. Auch der wahre Politiker ist im letzten Sinne des Wortes ein Künstler. Auch der wahre Politiker ist im letzten Sinne des Wortes ein Künstler. Auch der wahre Politiker ist im letzten Sinne des Wortes ein Künstler. Wir Nationalsozialisten sind keine Handwerker der Politik. Wir sehen in Tagesfragen und Tagesnöten zwar einen Teil der uns obliegenden Sorgen, aber darüber steht doch ein Wille und darunter liegt eine Idee, die Tagesfragen und Tagesnöten erst den echten Sinn und auch die einzige Lösungsmöglichkeit geben.
Deutsche Hörer, dem, der heute wieder zu euch spricht, war es vergönnt, im Lauf seines nun schon langen Lebens für das geistige Ansehen Deutschlands einiges zu tun. Ich bin dankbar dafür, aber ich habe kein Recht, mich dessen zu rühmen, denn es war Fügen und lag nicht in meiner Absicht. Kein Künstler tut sein Werk, um den Ruhm seines Landes und Volkes zu mehren. Die Quelle der Produktivität ist das individuelle Gewissen. Ihr Deutsche dürftet mir heute mein Werk nicht danken, auch wenn ihr wolltet, sei es darum. Es wurde nicht um euretwillen, sondern aus eigenster Not getan. Aber etwas ist, das wirklich um euretwillen aus sozialem und nicht aus privatem Gewissen geschah. Und täglich werde ich gewisser, dass die Zeit kommen wird und schon näher kommt, wo ihr es mir danken und es mir höher anrechnen werdet als meine Geschichtenbücher. Das ist, dass vor den verworfenen Mächten, in deren Joch ihr heute hilflos geschirrt seid und die euch durch 1000 Untaten in ein unvorstellbares Verderben führen. Ich kannte sie. Ich wusste, dass nichts als Katastrophen und Elend für Deutschland und für Europa aus ihrem unsäglich niederträchtigen Wesen erwachsen konnten, während die Mehrzahl von euch in heute gewiss schon für euch selbst unfassbarer Verblendung sie für die Bringer von Ordnung, Schönheit und nationaler Würde hielt. Katastrophen und Elend Katastrophen und Elend. Kann ein Volk, eine Jugend tiefer sinken? Kann ein Volk, eine Jugend tiefer sinken? Dann kann euch immer noch Rettung, kann euch Freiheit und Friede werden.
Wrong styles of work still exist to a serious extent in our literary and art circles. And there are still many defects among our comrades.
I think because freedom of expression has so much to do with art creativity or art activities. So we often have to we often being pushed to the position we have to respond to the situation, which is very political.
Idealism, dogmatism, empty illusions, empty talk, contempt for practice, and aloofness from the masses, all of which call for an effective and serious campaign of rectification.
And, every day, all our struggles somehow associated with this kind of effort. As artists, we want to improve our situation, which means independent thinking and the freedom of expression and communication. So by doing that, we become very political.
Difficulties will arise for them, not only in the villages, but also here in Yan'an.
And the communist society, the most powerful thing for them is try to blocking people to share information and to communicate about their feelings.
Well, I think people want to travel outside themselves. Well, I think what people want to travel outside themselves. I think there's a need for vicarious experience that is not necessarily identical with the need for truth. There's a need for vicarious experience that is not necessarily identical with the need for truth. I think there's a need for fantasy. I think there is a longing to see taboos broken, violated. There is the imagination runs riot. And I think that kind of storytelling is very important. I must say it does appeal more to me. I always feel when I'm writing stories that, well, I'm inventing, and I might use something from my own life or the life of someone I know. But I feel as if I'm lending that to something that is basically inventive and that therefore basically fantastic. And I think of fiction, but again, I'm just speaking for myself and thinking of examples of fiction that I like very much. I think of fiction as a kind of speculativeness, a kind of fantasy. I'm interested in moral fantasies, moral science fiction even. And this could have the form of some kind of history or actually be placed in the past as well as in the future or in the present.
Ours is a time in which every intellectual or moral or artistic event is absorbed by a predatory embrace of consciousness, historicizing. Any statement or act can be assessed as a necessarily transient development or on a lower level belittled as mere fashion. The human mind possesses now almost a second nature, a perspective on its own achievements that fatally undermines their value and their claim to truth. For over a century, this historicizing perspective has occupied the very heart of our ability to understand anything at all. Perhaps once a marginal tick of consciousness, it is now a gigantic, uncontrollable gesture. The gesture whereby man indefatigably patronizes himself.
Well, Mr. Park, can you tell us how Monarch came into being?
It didn't jump out of the blue. It's a part of a long tradition, beginning back with Cézanne up through the Cubists, the post-Cubists, to the painting being done today.
Well, it's definitely a product of evolution.
Yes. It didn't jump out of the blue. It's a part of a long tradition, beginning back with Cézanne up through the Cubists, the post-Cubists, to the painting being done today.
Well, it's definitely a product of evolution.
Yes.
When we go back to this method question, which so many people do think is important, can you tell us how you developed your method of painting and why you paint as you do?
Well, method seems to me a natural growth out of a need. And from a need, the modern artist has found new ways of expressing the world about him. I happen to find ways that are different from the usual techniques of painting, which seems a little strange at the moment, but I don't think there's anything very different about it. Modern artist, it seems to me, is working and expressing an inner world. Modern artist, it seems to me, is working and expressing an inner world. In other words, expressing the energy, the motion, and other inner forces.
Would it be possible to say that the classical artist expressed his world by representing the objects, whereas the modern artist expresses his world by representing the effect the objects have upon him?
Yes, the modern artist is working with space and time and expressing his feelings rather than illustrating. It didn't jump out of the blue. It didn't jump
Blue poles. Blue poles. The purchase was confirmed in the Sun Herald and the Sunday Telegraph on the 23rd of September, 73. The next day, the Sun ran the story under the heading, 1.3 million for dribs and drabs. 1.3 million for dribs and drabs. 1.3 million for dribs and drabs. Barefoot drunks painted our 1 million masterpiece. People refer to blue poles, not disparagingly now, never. I'm not one to say I told you so, but...
Mr. Trump, one of the things people love about you is you speak your mind and you don't use a politician's filter. However, that is not without its downsides, in particular when it comes to women. You've called women you don't like fat pigs, dogs, slobs, and disgusting animals. Your Twitter account...
Only Rosie O'Donnell.
No, it wasn't. Your Twitter account...
Thank you.
For the record, it was well beyond Rosie O'Donnell.
Yes, I'm sure it was.
Your Twitter account has several disparaging comments about women's looks. You once told a contestant on Celebrity Apprentice it would be a pretty picture to see her on her knees. Does that sound to you like the temperament of a man we should elect as president? And how will you answer the charge from Hillary Clinton, who is likely to be the Democratic nominee, that you are part of the war on women? You are part of the war on women. 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 You are part of the war on women.
I think the big problem this country has is being politically correct. I think the big problem this country has is being politically correct. I've been challenged by so many people, and I don't frankly have time for total political correctness. Total political correctness. Total political correctness. Total political correctness. And frankly, what I say, and oftentimes it's fun, it's kidding, we have a good time, what I say is what I say. And honestly, Megan, if you don't like it, I'm sorry. I've been very nice to you, although I could probably maybe not be based on the way you have treated me, but I wouldn't do that. I could probably maybe not be based on the way you have treated me, but I wouldn't do that.
I just don't respect her as a journalist. So I have, she gets out and she starts asking me all sorts of ridiculous questions. And, you can see there was blood coming out of her eyes, blood coming out of her wherever.
I think the big problem this country has is being politically correct. I think the big problem this country has is being politically correct.
I think that putting a wife to work is a very dangerous thing. I don't want to sound too much like a chauvinist, but when I come home and dinner's not ready, I go through the roof. If Ivanka were my daughter, perhaps I'd be dating her. If Ivanka were my daughter, perhaps I'd be dating her. She does have a very nice figure. Grab him by the pussy. 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 Grab him by the pussy.
I just don't respect her. I just don't respect her. I just don't respect her. I just don't respect her.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker, and I rise to oppose the motion moved by the Leader of the Opposition.
And in so doing, I say to the Leader of the Opposition, I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man. I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man. I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man. I will not. And the government will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man. Not now, not ever. The Leader of the Opposition says that people who hold sexist views and who are misogynists are not appropriate for high office. Well, I hope the Leader of the Opposition has got a piece of paper and he is writing out his resignation. Because if he wants to know what misogyny looks like in modern Australia, he doesn't need a motion in the House of Representatives, he needs a mirror. That's what he needs. That is all we have heard from him. Now looking at his watch, because apparently a woman's spoken too long, I've had him yell at me to shut up in the past, but I will take the remaining seconds of my speaking time to say to the Leader of the Opposition, I think the best course for him is to reflect on the standards he's exhibited in public life. And the Leader of the Opposition should think seriously about the role of women in public life and in Australian society, because we are entitled to a better standard than this. Yeah.
I was a budding writer. I was a budding writer, but when I was young, I was a passionate, creative writer. I was a budding writer, but when I was young, I was a passionate, creative writer and sort of a poet. That's how I would release myself. You know, whenever I was struggling in school or didn't want to go outside and deal with the nonsense in the neighborhood, I would write. You know, whenever I was struggling in school or didn't want to go outside and deal with the nonsense in the neighborhood, I would write and write and write and write. Robert Frost once wrote, "A poem begins as a lump in the throat." In writing poetry, you all put words into that kind of emotion. You give voice to your hopes, your dreams, your worries and your fears, and when you do that, when you share yourself that way and make yourself vulnerable like that, you're taking a risk. And that's brave. Not many people are willing to do that, to put themselves out there like that. And when you write poetry, you're not just expressing yourself, you're also connecting to people. And when you write poetry, you're not just expressing yourself, you're also connecting to people. And when you write poetry, you're not just expressing yourself, you're also connecting to people. And that's the key to everything we want to be and do as human beings, is our ability to connect to one another. And that's the key to everything we want to be and do as human beings, is our ability to connect to one another. Think about how you feel when you read a poem that really speaks to you, one that perfectly expresses what you're thinking and feeling. When you read that, you feel understood, right? I know I do. You feel less alone. I know I do. You realize despite all our differences, there are so many human experiences and emotions that we share. And poetry doesn't just show us how much we share, it also exposes us to wonderful new ideas and experiences. It helps us see the world in an entirely different way. It helps us see the world in an entirely different way. In an entirely different way.
Mr. Bragg?
Thank you. That's the end. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. And thanks very much to Claire for inviting me here to do it, and thanks very much to Mitchell for setting all the technology up, which was wonderful. Thank you again for coming. Thanks. Thank you.